The marble hall of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York echoed with morning footsteps. Amara Washington pushed through the heavy bronze door at 8:47 a.m., her Nike sneakers still caked with mud from the Newark operation that had ended 2 hours earlier. Her gray hooded sweatshirt concealed the bulletproof vest she hadn't removed. The black backpack contained classified documents for Judge Drake's 9 a.m. hearing. The metal detector beeped. Normal. She always carried her service weapon. Amara reached for her credentials. "Stop right there." The voice came loud, aggressive. A young blonde officer blocked her path, hand on his gun. Officer B. Sullivan. "Backpack on the ground. Now." "Officer Sullivan, I said backpack on the ground," Blake Sullivan shouted, drawing stares from lawyers crossing the hall. "Didn't you hear the detector? Don't you see where you are?" Amara lowered her backpack slowly, hands visible. 20 years as a federal agent had taught her to recognize this threat. Young officer, white, male. That specific cocktail of authority and assumption that turned dangerous quickly. "Officer, I'm a federal employee. I have identification." "Yeah, I bet you do." Blake circled her like a predator. "Let me guess. You're a lawyer? Maybe a senator? People like you always claim to be somebody important when you get caught where you don't belong." Officer Tyler Kendrick materialized beside his partner, hand moving toward his weapon. At 28, Tyler had 4 years on the force and cold eyes that saw threats in every dark face. "Problem, Blake?" "Just another trespasser trying to talk her way past security." Blake kicked Amara's backpack, sending it skidding across marble. "Check out those clothes. When's the last time you saw someone dressed like that in a federal courthouse?" Around them, the morning crowd grew. Lawyers clutched briefcases tighter. A woman in pearls pulled her daughter closer. Someone was filming, a small red light visible in Amara's peripheral vision. "My credentials are in my jacket pocket," Amara said steadily, despite rage building in her chest. "If you'll allow me to reach—" "Keep your hands where I can see them," Blake barked, gripping his gun. "Tyler, pat her down. I don't trust this one." "You want to pat me down?" Amara's voice remained calm, but something in her tone made Tyler hesitate. "In a federal courthouse? In front of witnesses? Are you certain that's what you want to do?" Blake stepped closer, invading her space. His breath smelled of coffee and arrogance. "Listen here, sweetheart. I don't know what hood you crawled out of this morning, but this is a United States federal courthouse. We don't let just anybody waltz in here in gym clothes like they own the place." "Gym clothes?" Amara repeated slowly. "Is that what you think these are? What else would they be?" Blake laughed, looking to Tyler for support. "You think someone important would show up to federal court looking like they just finished a shift at McDonald's?" The crowd had grown to 20 people. Attorney Jasmine Chen stood near security, phone raised, capturing every word. She'd worked here 8 years and had never seen anything like this. If you believe everyone deserves dignity regardless of appearance, subscribe now. This story is about to expose the most catastrophic mistake in courthouse history. "Officer Sullivan," Amara tried again, hands raised. "I need to reach for my identification." I'm moving my hand slowly toward my jacket pocket. "Don't overreact. Don't tell me how to do my job." Blake grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her bicep with unnecessary force. "You're under arrest for trespassing on federal property and attempting to breach courthouse security." "On what grounds?" Amara demanded, not resisting but not yielding. "I passed through the metal detector. I've committed no crime. You're detaining me based on—" "Based on you looking suspicious," Blake interrupted, twisting her arm behind her back. "Based on you not belonging here. Based on you not following lawful orders from a law enforcement officer." Sergeant Graham Thornton pushed through the crowd, weathered face set in bureaucratic annoyance. At 45, with 22 years on the force, he'd seen enough courthouse drama. "What's the situation, Sullivan?" "Sarge, this woman tried to bypass security. She's claiming to be some federal employee, but look at her. Does she look federal to you? Thornton's eyes swept over Amara, muddy sneakers, worn jeans, hooded sweatshirt. His expression hardened. Credentials? I've been trying to show them for 5 minutes, Amara said, voice tight with controlled fury. Your officers won't let me reach for them. Sullivan, let her get her ID, Thornton ordered. Blake reluctantly released his grip, but stayed close, hand on weapon. Amara moved carefully, reaching into her jacket and pulling out a leather credential wallet. The gold FBI seal caught the overhead lights. Blake snatched it from her hands before she could display it properly. He examined it with theatrical skepticism, holding it up to light, squinting at the hologram. This is fake, he announced loudly. Sarge, this is definitely fake. I've seen FBI credentials before. This doesn't look right. Doesn't look right how? Amara asked quietly. The photo, for one thing. Blake smirked. FBI agents don't look like you. They're professional, clean cut. You look like you just rolled out of bed. I look like I just spent 8 hours in a surveillance van in Newark tracking a domestic terrorism cell, Amara corrected, which is exactly what I was doing before coming directly here. Tyler laughed, harsh sound echoing off marble walls. Domestic terrorism? Sure. And I'm the president. Lady, we've heard every excuse. The fake federal credentials? That's actually creative. Most people just lie about being lawyers. Security Chief Warren Mitchell emerged from the main office drawn by commotion. At 52, he ran courthouse security with military precision, and disturbances in his lobby were personal affronts. What's happening here? Sir, we have a suspected trespasser with forged federal credentials, Blake reported, chest puffed like a peacock. I've detained her pending arrest. Mitchell took the credential wallet, studying it more carefully than Blake had. His expression shifted slightly, something that might have been doubt, but he handed it back to Blake with a dismissive gesture. Process her. If the credentials are fake, she'll face federal charges for impersonating a federal officer. If they're real. He paused, looking at Amara's muddy shoes. Well, real federal agents know better than to show up to court looking like that. This is racial profiling, Amara stated clearly, voice carrying across the hall. You're detaining me based solely on my appearance and your assumption that a black woman in casual clothes can't possibly belong in this building. Oh, here we go, Blake groaned theatrically. The race card. Classic. No, lady. I'm detaining you because you look suspicious. Because you're dressed inappropriately. Because your credentials look fake. Your skin color has nothing to do with it. Doesn't it? Jasmine Chen called from the crowd, still filming. I've seen dozens of white attorneys walk through this lobby in jeans and sneakers. I've never seen any of them thrown against a wall. Ma'am, step back, Tyler warned. Don't interfere with law enforcement operations. Blake grabbed Amara's wrists, pulling them behind her back. Metal cuffs bit into her skin with deliberate pressure. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Amara interrupted. I've read them to hundreds of suspects. Officer Sullivan, you're making a catastrophic mistake. The only mistake here is yours. Blake shoved her forward, forcing her to stumble. Several people gasped. Jasmine's phone captured the moment Amara's face came dangerously close to the marble pillar. Careful with her, Sullivan, Thornton warned half-heartedly. We don't need complaints. She's resisting, Sarge, Blake lied smoothly. I'm using appropriate force to maintain control. Amara wasn't resisting. She stood perfectly still, hands cuffed behind her back, expression a mask of controlled rage. But Blake's narrative didn't require truth. It only required the familiar script: black person, white authority, assumptions, violence. Take her to holding, Mitchell ordered. We'll sort this out after Judge Drake's hearing. You're holding me during Judge Drake's hearing? Amara's voice rose for the first time, genuine alarm breaking through. That's exactly when I need to— You don't need to be anywhere, Blake interrupted, shoving her toward the security office. except a holding cell. The marble hallway to the holding cells was lined with portraits of former judges, their painted eyes witnessing this injustice with silent disapproval. Blake kept his hand pressed between Amara's shoulder blades, pushing her forward. "You know what I love about this job?" Blake's voice was conversational now, almost friendly. "Getting to protect real federal employees from people like you. People who think a fake badge means they can go anywhere." Tyler opened the holding cell door, hinges screaming. "In you go." This might take a while. The cell was 8 by 6 feet, concrete walls painted institutional beige, steel bench bolted to floor, toilet in corner. Amara had seen hundreds of holding cells in her career. She'd never imagined being locked in one. "My phone call," she said. "I'm entitled to—" "You'll get your phone call when we decide," Blake sneered. "Maybe after lunch. We're very busy today. Big federal case. Real federal agents doing real federal work, not whatever scam you're running." He slammed the door. The lock clicked with terrible finality. Through the small window, Amara could see Blake and Tyler high-fiving, laughing about the suspicious character they'd caught. Thornton was filling out paperwork, his pen scratching away at a report that would paint this as routine security procedure rather than the civil rights violation it was. Amara sat on the cold steel bench, cuffed hands behind her back, circulation already restricting. The classified documents in her backpack, documents for Judge Drake's corruption case, sat unguarded in the security office. The domestic terrorism cell she'd spent 8 months infiltrating would scatter if they learned the FBI director had been arrested. Years of work, potentially compromised. And why? Because Officer Blake Sullivan, 26 years old with 9 months on the job, had looked at her dark skin and muddy shoes and decided she didn't belong. The irony was unbearable. Amara Washington, the first black woman to lead the FBI in its 116-year history, was sitting in a holding cell in a federal courthouse, arrested by the very system she'd dedicated her life to serving. From down the hall, Blake's voice. "Did you see her face when I cuffed her? Priceless. These people always think they're above the law until they meet officers who actually enforce it." "Think her credentials were really fake?" Tyler asked. "Had to be. FBI doesn't hire, well, you know." "Yeah, I know." Their laughter echoed off concrete walls. In the courtroom on the 8th floor, U.S. Marshal Jennifer Reyes checked her watch. 8:59 a.m. Judge Drake's corruption trial began in 60 seconds and Director Washington still hadn't arrived with classified briefing materials. "Marshal Reyes," Judge Drake called from chambers. "Is Director Washington here?" "Not yet, Your Honor." She confirmed she'd be here by 8:45. "That's unlike her. The FBI director is never late." Drake frowned. "Try her cell." Reyes dialed. No answer. She tried the FBI field office. They confirmed Director Washington had left Newark at 6:30 a.m. and should have arrived over an hour ago. "Your Honor, something's wrong." Meanwhile, Blake was typing his arrest report with theatrical flourish. "Subject exhibited suspicious behavior, refused to comply with lawful orders, presented fraudulent federal credentials." Sullivan. Thornton looked up from his computer, face suddenly pale. "What was the name on those credentials again?" "Some made-up name. Washington, I think. Amara Washington." "Why?" Thornton's hands shook as he pulled up the FBI website. He clicked to the leadership page. His mouth went dry. There, in an official photograph wearing a Navy suit and FBI pin, was the same woman currently sitting cuffed in their holding cell. Amara Washington, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Oh, God," Thornton whispered. "Oh, God, oh, God." "What?" Blake leaned over, looking at the screen. His confident smirk faltered. That can't be. You just arrested the FBI director," Thornton choked out. "You arrested the FBI director and put her in a holding cell. You mocked her. You laughed at her credentials." Blood drained from Blake's face so fast he swayed. No, that's wrong. FBI directors don't look like... They don't dress like... Like what, Sullivan? Thornton's voice was sharp, edged with panic. They don't look like what? Finish that sentence. At that moment, Marshal Reyes's voice came over security radio, clear and urgent. This is U.S. Marshal Reyes. I need immediate location confirmation on FBI Director Amara Washington. She was scheduled to arrive at 8:45. Has security seen her? Blake couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed silently. Security? Reyes's voice came again, sharper. Respond. Mitchell grabbed the radio, face ashen. Marshal Reyes, this is Security Chief Mitchell. We have a situation. What kind of situation? Director Washington she's in our custody. Silence. Then, she's what? She was detained by courthouse security approximately 20 minutes ago. On what charges? Mitchell looked at Blake, who was visibly shaking. Trespassing, fake credentials, failure to comply with security protocols. Another moment of silence. When Reyes spoke again, her voice was ice. You arrested the FBI director for trespassing in a federal courthouse? We didn't know who she was. She's the FBI director. She carries FBI credentials. What more identification do you need? The officer thought her credentials were fake. The officer thought? Reyes's voice could cut glass. I'm coming down there right now, and you better pray Director Washington is unharmed, uncuffed, and ready to forgive the most catastrophic failure of security protocol I've ever witnessed. The radio clicked off. This rookie cop's world is about to implode, and if you want to see justice delivered in the most satisfying way possible, hit subscribe and like right now because what happens next will leave you speechless. The elevator dinged. Marshal Jennifer Reyes stepped into the security office, her face a study in controlled fury. Behind her, Agent Marcus Hayes, Amara's deputy director, surveyed the scene with cold eyes, cataloging evidence. Where is she? Reyes demanded. Mitchell pointed toward the holding cells with a trembling hand. Reyes moved fast, boots echoing off concrete. She reached the cell where Amara sat, still cuffed, posture perfect despite everything. Director Washington. Reyes's voice cracked slightly. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. We're getting you out right now. Thank you, Marshal. Amara's voice was calm, professional. The cuff key would be appreciated. Blake stumbled forward with the key, hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the cuffs. The metal fell away, leaving red marks on Amara's wrists where they'd been too tight. Amara stood slowly, rubbing circulation back into her hands. She looked at Blake Sullivan, really looked at him and watched him crumble under her gaze. Officer Sullivan, she said quietly, what did you see when you looked at me this morning? Blake opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Let me tell you what I saw, Amara continued. I saw a young officer with 9 months on the job. I saw someone who let assumptions override training. I saw someone who confused authority with power. She stepped closer. What you didn't see was a federal agent. What you couldn't see was someone who belongs. What you refused to see was someone who's earned the right to dress however operational needs require. Ma'am, I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Agent Hayes interrupted, stepping forward. You assaulted the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You falsely imprisoned her. You ignored her credentials. You mocked her appearance. You laughed about it. His voice was steel. Officer Sullivan, you've committed multiple federal crimes in the span of 30 minutes. Blake's legs buckled. Tyler caught him before he hit the floor. Amara walked past them, retrieving her backpack from the security office. She checked her watch. 9:12 a.m. 12 minutes late for the most important briefing of the year. Marshal Reyes, I need to get to Judge Drake's chambers immediately. The classified materials. Already taken care of, Director, Reyes assured her. Agent Hayes brought backup materials when we couldn't locate you. Judge Drake postponed the hearing start by 15 minutes. Amara nodded, then turned back to the security office where Blake, Tyler, Thornton, and Mitchell stood frozen like statues awaiting judgment. "Security Chief Mitchell," Amara said. "You're suspended effective immediately pending federal investigation. Your security clearance is revoked. Federal marshals will escort you from the building." Mitchell's face crumbled. "Director Washington, please." "Sergeant Thornton, suspended. Your 22 years of service just ended with a catastrophic failure of judgment and leadership." Thornton said nothing, simply removed his badge with shaking hands. "Officer Kendrick, suspended. You'll face federal charges for false imprisonment and assault on a federal officer." Tyler's face was white as chalk. "I was following orders." "You're a police officer, not a Nazi soldier," Hayes snapped. "That defense didn't work at Nuremberg, and it won't work here." Amara finally turned to Blake Sullivan. The young officer who, 30 minutes ago, had been so confident in his authority, so certain in his assumptions, now looked like a child caught doing something he knew was terribly wrong. "Officer Sullivan," Amara began, her voice devoid of emotion, "you are suspended without pay, effective immediately. You will face federal charges including assault on a federal officer, false imprisonment, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. Agent Hayes will take you into custody." "No," Blake whispered. "No, please. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," Amara interrupted. "You looked at a black woman in casual clothes and decided she was a criminal. You saw muddy sneakers and assumed poverty, ignorance, criminality. You examined federal credentials and declared them fake because they didn't match your prejudiced expectations of what an FBI agent should look like." Blake was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," Amara corrected. "You chose to see my skin color before my credentials. You chose to trust your racist assumptions over physical evidence. You chose violence over verification. Those weren't mistakes, Officer Sullivan. Those were decisions rooted in the same bigotry that has plagued law enforcement for generations." Agent Hayes stepped forward, handcuffs in hand. "Officer Blake Sullivan, you're under arrest for assault on a federal officer." "Wait," Blake choked out. "Please, my career, my life." "What about my life?" Amara's voice rose for the first time, raw emotion breaking through professional composure. "What about the 8 months I spent infiltrating a domestic terrorism cell? What about the classified operation you compromised by detaining me? What about the briefing I missed that could have impacted national security?" She stepped closer to Blake, her voice dropping back to deadly calm. "What about the thousands of Black Americans who are stopped, harassed, assaulted, and killed by officers who make the same mistake you made today? The difference is, they don't have FBI credentials to save them. They don't have federal authority to expose the injustice. They just have their skin color and officers like you who've decided that's all the evidence needed to justify violence." Blake collapsed to his knees, shoulders shaking with sobs. Hayes pulled him to his feet, securing the handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Hayes led Blake away, Amara turned to the crowd that had gathered. Jasmine Chen was still filming, her phone capturing every moment. Other attorneys, court staff, and visitors stood transfixed. "Let this be a lesson," Amara addressed them directly. "Racism in law enforcement isn't always burning crosses and white hoods. Sometimes it's a young officer who thinks muddy shoes mean criminality. Sometimes it's a sergeant who sees casual clothes and assumes trespassing. Sometimes it's a security chief who trusts skin color over credentials." She picked up her backpack, slinging it over her shoulder. "These officers will face justice. But the real question is, how many Blake Sullivans are out there making the same assumptions every single day with victims who don't have the power to fight back?" Amara walked toward the elevator, Marshal Reyes at her side. Behind her, the security office was in chaos. Federal agents were already photographing the holding cell, documenting the violation. The crowd was dispersing, phones out, messages flying across social media. Jasmine Chen's video had gone viral, 20,000 views in 15 minutes. The hashtag FBI director arrested was trending nationally. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse in Manhattan was packed beyond capacity. Judge Harrison Drake presided over United States versus Blake Sullivan, with standing room only in the gallery. Prosecutor David Walsh stood at the podium, his voice carrying authority that filled the courtroom. Your Honor, the government will prove that Officer Blake Sullivan committed multiple felonies motivated by racial animus and abuse of authority. Blake sat at the defense table in a suit that looked borrowed, his face gaunt from 3 weeks of sleepless nights. His attorney, a public defender named Robert Chen, looked equally exhausted. Walsh clicked a remote, displaying Jasmine Chen's video on the courtroom screens. The evidence is incontrovertible. Officer Sullivan detained Director Washington based solely on her appearance. He ignored her credentials. He physically assaulted her. He falsely imprisoned her. And most damning, he laughed about it afterward, making racist comments about who looks like an FBI agent. The video played. The courtroom watched in silence as Blake grabbed Amara, twisted her arms, cuffed her, shoved her toward the holding cell. The audio was crystal clear. FBI doesn't hire, well, you know. Several jurors shook their heads in disgust. The prosecution calls Director Amara Washington. Amara took the stand, swearing to tell the truth. She wore her full FBI dress uniform, medals and commendations glinting under the courtroom lights. The contrast with the casual clothes from the video was stark and deliberate. Walsh approached. Director Washington, please describe what happened on the morning of October 28th. Amara's testimony was precise, professional, devastating. She described the 8-month terrorism investigation, the Newark operation that had ended at 6:30 a.m., her direct travel to the courthouse with classified materials, the metal detector, Blake's immediate assumption of criminality. When did you first attempt to show Officer Sullivan your credentials? Within the first 30 seconds of our interaction. And what was his response? He refused to allow me to reach for them. When I finally produced them, he declared them fake without proper examination. Why do you believe he declared them fake? Blake's attorney objected. Speculation, Your Honor. I'll rephrase, Walsh said smoothly. Director Washington, in your 20 years of federal law enforcement experience, have you ever had your credentials questioned before this incident? Never. Have you ever been arrested while carrying valid federal credentials? Never. Have you ever had a law enforcement officer declare your credentials fake after examining them? Never. Walsh let that hang in the air. What happened after Officer Sullivan cuffed you? Amara described the holding cell, the denial of her phone call, Blake's comments about these people and who looks like an FBI agent, the laughter, the mockery. How did this incident impact your operation? The domestic terrorism cell we'd been tracking scattered when word spread that law enforcement was active in the area. 8 months of work compromised. 3 suspects we'd identified disappeared. The investigation had to be completely restructured. And the classified briefing? Judge Drake's corruption case involved a sitting police captain accused of evidence tampering. My briefing contained FBI forensic analysis that was time-sensitive. The delay could have compromised the prosecution's case. Walsh nodded. No further questions. Blake's attorney stood for cross-examination, but he looked defeated before he began. Director Washington, my client maintains he was following proper security protocols. Your client ignored federal credentials, Amara interrupted calmly. That's not protocol. That's prejudice. Chen tried again. Officer Sullivan states he had legitimate concerns about your appearance. My appearance, Amara repeated. You mean my black skin and casual clothes. That's not what I... Then what did you mean, counselor? Be specific. Chen had no answer. The prosecution called witness after witness. Marshal Reyes testified about the frantic search for the missing FBI director. Agent Hayes described the crime scene documentation. Jasmine Chen testified about filming the entire incident. Security camera footage showed everything Blake had claimed was resisting arrest was actually Amara standing perfectly still while being assaulted. The defense called no witnesses. What could they say? The video spoke for itself. After 3 days of trial, the jury deliberated for 90 minutes. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Drake asked. The forewoman stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On the count of assault on a federal officer, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of deprivation of civil rights under color of law?" "Guilty." "On the count of false imprisonment?" "Guilty." Blake's head dropped to the defense table. His mother's sob echoed from the gallery. Judge Drake's face was granite as he addressed the defendant. "Officer Sullivan, you have been found guilty of serious federal crimes. These crimes weren't committed in a moment of panic or self-defense. They were committed during a deliberate, sustained violation of Director Washington's constitutional rights, motivated by racial prejudice and enabled by your badge." Blake stood, swaying slightly. "You saw a black woman and assumed criminality. You saw casual clothes and assumed poverty. You saw someone who didn't match your narrow expectations and decided she couldn't possibly belong. This court finds your actions reprehensible and your subsequent attempts to justify them even worse." Drake paused, letting the weight settle. "I hereby sentence you to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are permanently barred from law enforcement. You will complete 500 hours of community service with civil rights organizations, and you will pay restitution to Director Washington for damages resulting from your crimes. Justice has been served. Blake Sullivan will spend 4 years in prison for his racist assault on the FBI director." If this moment of accountability moved you, subscribe, like, and comment. Do you think the sentence was fair, or should it have been longer? Blake Sullivan was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his mother's wails fading as the heavy oak doors closed behind him. The gallery erupted in whispered conversations, phones emerging to share the verdict across social media within seconds. Amara Washington stood outside the courthouse, microphones thrust toward her face by 24 reporters. Camera lights blazed in the autumn afternoon. "Director Washington, how does it feel to see justice served?" a CNN reporter called out. Amara adjusted her FBI jacket, the gold badge catching sunlight. "Justice today was served for one victim who happened to have federal authority and resources, but I'm acutely aware that thousands of Americans experience similar profiling every day without the power to fight back. Blake Sullivan's conviction changes his life. Our goal must be to change the system that created officers like Blake Sullivan." "What changes are you proposing?" NBC asked. "The FBI is launching a comprehensive review of security protocols at all federal facilities nationwide. We're implementing mandatory implicit bias training for every officer with federal courthouse access. We're establishing a direct complaint hotline where any citizen can report civil rights violations without fear of retaliation." Amara's voice grew stronger. "And we're creating a database tracking officers with patterns of discriminatory conduct, accessible to all federal agencies." A Fox News correspondent pushed forward. "Critics say you're overreacting to one officer's mistake." "Mistake?" Amara interrupted, her tone sharp. "Officer Sullivan's actions weren't a mistake. Reaching for the wrong key is a mistake. Calling someone by the wrong name is a mistake. Looking at a black woman with federal credentials and deciding she's a criminal because of her skin color, that's a choice rooted in racism. That's a pattern reinforced by systemic bias. That's exactly what we need to eliminate from law enforcement." She gestured toward the courthouse. "This institution, this building where I was assaulted, represents both America's commitment to justice and its failures to deliver it equally. Today's verdict says no badge grants immunity from accountability. Today's verdict says civil rights matter regardless of who violates them. What about Officers Kendrick, Thornton, and Chief Mitchell? The Washington Post asked. Agent Marcus Hayes stepped forward, his voice carrying federal authority. Officer Tyler Kendrick pled guilty to conspiracy and false imprisonment, sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Sergeant Graham Thornton pled guilty to obstruction of justice and civil rights violations, sentenced to 2 years. Security Chief Warren Mitchell pled guilty to gross negligence and civil rights violations, sentenced to 3 years probation and permanent disqualification from federal employment. All 4 officers will be listed in the FBI's new Civil Rights Violator Registry, Amara added. Any law enforcement agency hiring them will receive automatic notification of their convictions and the nature of their crimes. The press conference lasted 40 minutes. Amara answered every question with the same measured precision she brought to congressional testimony. When it ended, she walked down the courthouse steps where, 6 months ago, Blake Sullivan had arrested her. A small memorial had appeared at the base of those steps. Photos of victims who hadn't survived their encounters with prejudiced officers, flowers, candles, notes that read "Justice for All" and "Black Lives Matter." Amara knelt, placing her own bouquet among the others. She touched one photo, a young man named Marcus Thompson, killed during a traffic stop 3 years ago. No body cameras, no viral video, no FBI director status to protect him. Just a family's grief and a system that called it justified. "This is why we keep fighting," she whispered. 18 months later, Director Amara Washington stood in the same courthouse, now completely transformed. The security checkpoint featured new protocols, new training standards, new leadership. Officer positions that Blake Sullivan and his colleagues once held were now staffed by diverse teams who'd completed the FBI's Revolutionary Bias Recognition Program. Marshal Jennifer Reyes approached, clipboard in hand. "Director, the new security team wants to present their 6-month evaluation results." The conference room was packed with officers from federal courthouses across the country. Amara listened as they shared data. Discrimination complaints down 87%. Positive interaction ratings up 94%. 0 civil rights violations reported. Diverse hiring up 156%. "These numbers tell a story," Amara told the assembled officers. "They tell the story of what happens when we choose accountability over defensiveness, when we prioritize civil rights over convenience, when we hire for character rather than comfort." A young black female officer raised her hand. "Director Washington, I transferred here from Chicago PD specifically because of your reforms. My previous department told me I was too sensitive about racial issues. Here, that sensitivity is valued as professional awareness. Thank you for making space for officers like me." Amara smiled. "Thank you for proving that excellent policing and civil rights protection aren't contradictory goals, they're complementary necessities." The Blake Sullivan case had become a Harvard Kennedy School case study, required reading at every FBI training academy, featured in law enforcement journals worldwide. Not as a story of one bad officer, but as an examination of systemic failures and systemic solutions. Dr. Patricia Henderson from the Chicago Urban League, who'd served on Amara's Reform Oversight Committee, presented findings at the 6-month review. Director Washington's protocols have been adopted voluntarily by 847 local police departments nationwide. Departments implementing these reforms show measurable improvements in community relations, reduced use of force incidents, and higher officer retention rates. The resistance we initially faced from police unions has transformed into enthusiastic adoption once they saw the results, Henderson continued. Officers report feeling more confident in their interactions because they have clear guidelines that protect both community members and themselves from situations rooted in bias rather than legitimate security concerns. Amara addressed the room. Blake Sullivan is currently in year 2 of his federal sentence. His prison time isn't the victory. The victory is that his actions sparked reforms preventing thousands of future Blake Sullivans from harming communities while wearing a badge. She clicked to the next slide, showing Officer Sullivan's disciplinary record that had been hidden before his attack on her. 17 complaints in 9 months, all dismissed, all involving people of color, all documented but never addressed. The system protected Blake Sullivan until he assaulted someone with the authority to expose that protection. Our reforms ensure that patterns of misconduct are flagged immediately, investigated thoroughly, and addressed definitively before they escalate to civil rights violations. 3 years after her arrest, Amara testified before Congress about the nationwide impact of her reforms. Senate chambers were filled to capacity. "Senator, you asked whether one incident justifies sweeping federal intervention," Amara addressed the Judiciary Committee chairman. That one incident revealed systemic failures existing in security protocols nationwide. Blake Sullivan wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom. Our reforms treat the disease, not just the symptom. She pulled out a thick report. Since implementing the FBI Civil Rights Protection Initiative, we've documented 2,847 instances where the new protocols prevented situations that would have escalated to civil rights violations under the old system. We've provided intervention training to 47,000 federal officers. We've established accountability mechanisms that have resulted in early identification and remediation of 312 officers showing problematic patterns before those patterns became crimes. The fiscal impact, asked the senior senator from Ohio. The reforms cost $47 million annually. The projected savings from reduced civil rights litigation, improved community relations, and increased operational efficiency exceed $200 million annually. Beyond financial metrics, we've prevented immeasurable human suffering and strengthened public trust in federal law enforcement. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted 18-4 to make Amara's reforms mandatory for all federal facilities and recommended them for state and local adoption. 5 years after Blake Sullivan's arrest, Amara stood in the same courthouse hall where she'd been detained, now hosting the annual Civil Rights in Law Enforcement Conference. 500 officers from all 50 states attended. "Some of you are here because you're required to be," Amara told the assembled crowd. "Some because you're curious. Some because you've experienced discrimination yourselves. Wherever you started, I challenge you to finish this conference committed to being officers who see people, not stereotypes, who verify before assuming, who protect rather than profile." She gestured to the marble walls. 5 years ago, I was thrown against that wall, arrested in this building, mocked for not looking like an FBI director. Today, this building represents what's possible when we choose reform over resignation. When we demand better rather than accepting, "That's how it's always been." The conference concluded with the announcement of a new scholarship fund, established with Blake Sullivan's court-ordered restitution payment, providing full college tuition for students pursuing careers in civil rights law and criminal justice reform. Amara stood at the courthouse entrance as sunset painted the marble steps gold. Jasmine Chen, the attorney who'd filmed the original incident, approached with her phone. "Director Washington, I'm doing a 5-year anniversary piece for ProPublica. Can I ask, do you think about that morning often?" Amara considered the question carefully. "I think about Marcus Thompson, the young man killed during a traffic stop who never got to tell his story. I think about the thousands of people arrested, assaulted, or killed because officers like Blake Sullivan made assumptions based on skin color. I think about how my federal authority gave me a megaphone that most victims never access." She paused, looking up at the building where injustice had transformed into accountability. "That morning changed my life, but more importantly, the reforms it sparked are changing the system. Blake Sullivan is one officer serving time. The real victory is the officers who will never become the next Blake Sullivan because we built a system that catches and corrects bias before it destroys lives." "And Blake Sullivan himself? Have you had any contact?" "He writes to me from prison occasionally." Apologies. Reflections. Requests for forgiveness. Amara's expression softened slightly. I hope prison gives him time to confront the prejudices that led him there. I hope he emerges as someone who uses his experience to educate others. But my forgiveness isn't what matters. What matters is building a system where no one needs to be Blake Sullivan's victim to receive justice. The sun dropped below the Manhattan skyline, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Amara Washington, FBI director, civil rights advocate, and survivor of the injustice she'd dedicated her career to fighting, walked toward her car. Behind her, the courthouse stood as both monument to America's failures and testament to its capacity for change. One officer's racist assault had sparked a movement. One black woman's refusal to accept injustice had transformed federal law enforcement. The fight wasn't over. It would never be completely over. But tonight, justice had advanced measurably, systematically, permanently. And somewhere in a federal prison, Blake Sullivan sat in his cell, finally understanding what Amara Washington had known all along: badges don't grant immunity from accountability, and assumption based on skin color is always, inevitably, catastrophically wrong. Never judge someone by their appearance. Never assume you know someone's story. And never ever underestimate the power of one person standing up for justice to transform an entire system. If this story inspired you, subscribe, hit that like button, share with someone who needs to hear this message, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Real change happens when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. Director Washington proved that truth doesn't just prevail, it transforms. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters, your story matters, and your dignity is non-negotiable.